welcome to Tevora's webinar, CIS Critical Security Controls and CCPA, Achieving Reasonable Security. My name is Matt Fullerton, and I'm an account manager here with Tevora. But today we'll be hearing from Ben Dimmick, our manager of solutions. If there are any questions, please use the questions function within GoToMeeting, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. But first, before we begin, a little background. Here at Tevora, we're a management consultancy. We focus entirely on information security, compliance, and enterprise risk management. We offer a huge range of services, from security assessments and penetration tests, led by our Managing Director of Threat Services, Clayton Reness, to solution selection and implementation. That's actually led by Ben here. We can also help if there are any compliance frameworks that you'd like to align with, as we have John Huckabee leading our HIPAA, High Trust, and ISO 27001 services, along with the full privacy practice, including SOC 1 through 3, PCI, and more. That's led by Christina Whiting. We've been in business for over 16 years, and we work with companies of all sizes, all the way from startups to Fortune 500s. So that's a little bit of information on who we are here at Tevora. Ben, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks, Matt. So just getting into our agenda overall today, wanted to first of all cover just a little bit about Tevora, and then we'll be diving into the actual content of the webinar overall. As Matt alluded to, we have many clients that have a lot of very recognizable names. A lot of these I'm sure are familiar to you. I've been with Tevora now since 2012, so it's been a few years now. I've been working primarily in the solution space, although I do have experience working in a lot of our other sectors of the business as well, including compliance, penetration testing, and so on. But wanted to specify this time we're focusing very heavily on CIS and CCPA, and essentially a lot of the discussion around this stemmed from some initial discussions around what it means to achieve reasonable security with CCPA. The Attorney General for the state of California responded to the question of what that means by essentially stating that the CIS critical security controls are what they're identifying as the threshold for reasonable security. The intent behind it is that these controls will help to set the framework for the organization, and this is what most organizations are starting to focus on in terms of achieving that specific threshold. Now, a little more detail around it. The Kamala Harris, she went on to state that the controls are intended by organizations of all size and designed to be implemented and scalable. So this, I think, is a pretty key point. There's a couple of challenges to adhering to CIS, and we'll be getting into that in just a little bit. But one of the important things I want to point out here is that the CIS are intended to be that initial baseline to line everything else up against, and that the other components of the CIS controls are also intended to be scalable and adjusted based on what's happening. Actually, I'm sorry, one second here. My slides are frozen. All right, there we go. So these are the slides that you missed out on. This was the agenda. A couple of our clients in here. I'm sure there's a lot of recognizable companies on there. My bio, real quickly. As I mentioned, worked in solutions for quite a while. I've also worked in a lot of other areas of the business. And then getting into reasonable security. So going back to the quotes from the California Attorney General. So the CIS controls are really intended as the basic threshold for reaching compliance with CIS reasonable security thresholds. And then this is the second quote I was mentioning. So they acknowledge that the threshold is supposed to be scalable, supposed to be adaptable, and that there needs to be some variation from organization to organization, because what's simply effective for one organization may not be appropriate for another organization. So that's also been acknowledged here as well. Moving on then, so I will start this section by saying that I am not a lawyer, and I'm not giving legal advice. Simply reporting on what's happened in this case. I am an expert when it comes to the CIS critical security controls, but I am not a lawyer. One of the things I will point out in regards to the current state is that there is already one case that has started last week around CCPA and its impact on reasonable security. What happened was there's an organization out in Pennsylvania, Sunshine Behavioral Health Group. They suffered a breach in September of last year. 3,500 patients were impacted, and they're starting to run into some legal challenges as a result of it. The assertion is that they did not follow reasonable security under CCPA. This is definitely creating some challenges, and this is turning into a class action lawsuit. But there are definitely some factors to be considered here. We don't have all the details yet in terms of what was done to protect data, or what might have been neglected in this case. But the filing just says that they didn't feel that there was reasonable security in place, and they're using the identity theft consequences as the results of this action. Their analysis and prediction from the National Law Review, who reported on it, is one of the more important things. And essentially their prediction is that there's going to be more suits coming out of this, and that they're going to be more in this vein. And it's difficult to really know how this is all going to shake out. There's a lot of things that still need to be determined in terms of how this is being applied, what the legal barriers are that are set in terms of understanding impact, and who is culpable for what level of protection and so on. But the one other thing to keep in mind, and my goal here isn't to frighten anyone. It's more about remembering that, for instance, before a Target breach and the Home Depot breach and so on, it was pretty unprecedented for companies to be held directly liable at the scale that the Target was for the breach that they encountered. So there's a lot of these things that around CCPA and security that will be determined as we continue to proceed through this, and law is set and better understood. With that in mind, this is kind of the why. Let's get a little bit more into the what. And when I said that before, that it was a challenge to strictly follow CIS compliance guidelines, I want to kind of walk through that a little bit. The first issue is that there simply is no standard for compliance with CIS, and by that what I mean is, for instance, the standard wasn't originally intended to be complied with in the same manner that most other organizations follow compliance frameworks. So, for instance, PCI has compensating controls when there's something that can't be followed by the organization. Other compliance standards have non-compliance clauses where you can have a certain number of controls that you do not comply with, and so on and so forth. But they really don't have anything like that with CIS. They really don't have any way of really determining or testing how well these things are in place, and what the organization is really doing outside of stating what the objectives should be. So this leads us to CIS's intended function for the critical security controls. They have what they call the risk assessment method, or RAM is what they call it for short. And essentially the way this is supposed to work is that you're really supposed to focus on a risk-based mentality and methodology for applying these controls within each organization. So you start out by understanding which implementation group you're a part of. I'll get into more detail on that in just a second. They also apply tiers, and these two kind of overlap a little bit. Tiers are intended to provide a little bit more detail around how you would apply these to your organization, and these are actually specific to RAM in terms of the tier selection. The process that CIS lays out from there is to define the scope, getting an understanding of exactly which components within your organization are going to be controlled, how those are going to be managed, and so on. Defining what your risk assessment and acceptance criteria is, and this is interesting because what they're advocating for here is to lay that out ahead of time before you really start to even understand what your risks are. Figure out what the acceptable levels are for applying risks, and then go from there. And then at that point, you're conducting your risk assessment and you're proposing safeguards. So you're going into how do we remediate some of these things that we found that were unacceptable, and so on. The implementations groups themselves, this is the guidance that the CIS has provided, and I will say right off the bat that there are a number of these that I wouldn't align quite the way that they do. But essentially, each of the sub-controls within the CIS, critical security controls, is tied to applying to 1, 2, or 3 implementation groups. And all of the controls apply to implementation group 3, which frequently applies to most organizations out there. For instance, they essentially say that implementation group 1 is really the small and medium businesses. You're really looking at your organizations that have less than 200 or 300 employees. In a lot of cases, if you don't categorize yourself in the small medium business market, then you probably don't fit into implementation group 1. In a lot of cases, these are intended for mom and pop shop type organizations. Implementation group 2, this is where I would say the majority of businesses tend to fall into in terms of a size perspective. So at that point, you're too large to be considered an SMB, but generally speaking, you're not quite multinational, or if you are, you have relatively small offices and so on. Usually, we're talking about less than 1,000 employees or so, and then implementation group 3 is everybody who's larger than that. Now, there's usually a lot of the back and forth in terms of how we categorize everything. What we typically have done from our end is, instead of trying to align each organization to one implementation group, we instead take a look at it and say, we think you fit somewhere around here, somewhere between a 2 and a 3, or somewhere between a 1 and a 2, and try to follow controls according to that. By evaluating the risk associated with individual controls, that can help to simplify the process as well. That's really the metric that we want to follow against. But this is really intended to be a general guideline so that small organizations don't get necessarily overwhelmed by some of the very stringent implementation group 3 requirements that come in later on. Getting into the risk assessment process just a little bit more, CIS advocates using a quantitative risk analysis function, and this is kind of an example for what they are recommending following. They use a scale of 1 to 3, so they recommend figuring out what the likelihood is, and then also looking at the perceived impact against your organization as well as against others, and then multiplying all those numbers together to come up with your actual risk score. And then the following step after that is of course, you look at that's the section in green here. You look at the impact that a correction would have, and that helps you to evaluate if the correction is worth undertaking or not. So this is essentially the process that they break down for running through everything. The process that Tevora has adapted is a little bit different, a little bit, I guess I'd say a little bit larger in scope in terms of the way that we've helped our clients to work through these processes. The first one is, and this process will seem fairly familiar overall. We start off with the initial discovery process. So really we want to start off by understanding where risk would exist within the organization, and not from a vulnerability perspective, but from a where's the real secret sauce? Where's the stuff that we're really worried about? What are we trying to protect, and so on. Getting a feel for where the sensitive data is really at, and what we really are looking to keep safe. The next step from there is to get a feel for what the current state is of the organization. So where we have areas where we're doing well, where do we have areas where we're maybe not doing quite so well according to critical security controls. Assess phase is really where we sit down and start to build out this risk, understand where this all starts to come together. Where are these things really helping us to understand the risk within the organization overall. Compare. So during this stage, we focus pretty heavily on comparing the existing organization with other organizations. Part of the goal in this sense is to make sure that what we're doing to secure the organization is consistent with what others are doing. It's great to be ahead of the curve, but this is something that we've seen in the past, that getting behind what peers are doing can also be dangerous from a legal perspective. The impact to these changes is also validated. Then there's the remediation step, and then finally we have our monitor process. So during this process, we're focusing very heavily on ensuring that what's in place is effective, and that what we're doing is really working for the organization. So this is going back and repeating our risk assessment process, going back and evaluating new functions within the organization, looking at new changes, other things that might have come up, because this isn't really a process of we did it and now we're finished. We can call it a day. We really want to make sure this is a process of continual iteration and improvement across the organization overall. So these are the things we've been focusing on pretty heavily in terms of improving the compliance standards for our clients, especially around critical security controls. I wanted to dive into a couple of the controls themselves, and then we'll dive into questions after that. If you're already familiar with the CIS critical security controls, then a lot of this may be review for you, but hopefully I'll have some new content in here that's helpful for you as well. The controls, again, are really intended to be fairly challenging, and I will say that out of all of the organizations that we have worked with, there are very few who are meeting any of the controls within the critical security controls 100%. I would say that we see a lot of organizations that are coming very close, but there's very few that have any of them 100%, and I don't know of any organization that has all of them 100%. So again, trying to set expectations and temper that just a little bit here. The CIS basically is broken down into 3 categories here. So the first is our basic controls, and I should mention as well that the basic controls really start out with, well, rather, the controls are prioritized based on how important CIS feels each one is to organizational security. So they feel like the most important thing is ensuring that we have a good handle on our hardware assets, and the biggest thing behind this is, number one, knowing what all of our hardware is, and then being able to detect and respond when there's unauthorized hardware that gets introduced to the enterprise. So whether that's someone's got on the VPN that shouldn't be on the VPN, or someone's brought in an unauthorized device, things like this. That's the type of things they're looking for in there. The second one is around software assets. So this is looking much more at the same thing we did for controlling hardware, but instead we're looking at software. Being able to understand when somebody has rogue software running on their computer, understanding exactly what software is authorized, so that we can detect the stuff that is unauthorized. And other than that, it's just a matter of detecting what's out there and then responding to it. Continuous vulnerability management. So this is very focused around especially vulnerability scanning and remediation efforts. How well are we detecting vulnerabilities within the enterprise? How well are we responding to those when they are detected out there? What's our process for managing patching and so on? Controlled use of administrative privileges. We're focused very heavily on how we we secure our privileged accounts. So this has a big focus on MFA. It also has a surprising focus for a lot of folks on isolation between privileged accounts and unprivileged accounts. The intent behind it, well, I say one of the sub controls within here is basically locking things down so that you're using a separate PC for administrative tasks and so on. But that's one of the more advanced tasks. Just an example of some of the more advanced stuff out there. Secure configuration, number 5. So this focuses very heavily on your system hardening processes. What are you doing to protect your systems, ensure that they have a solid configuration in place? How is that monitored? How is that audited, and so on? That tends to be the biggest focus there. Number 6, logging. So this tends to focus very heavily on the SIM end of things, and what's happening in terms of logs. So this essentially the first 6, and most of these controls, this is what CIS says to start out with first. Make sure you have a good handle on these. Again, there are some components of these, such as, for instance, number 2 in software control. They, for instance, call out application whitelisting. That's just not reasonable for a lot of organizations out there at the moment. So that's just an example of the type of sub-controls that we have to evaluate against the risk for the enterprise before we look real closely about implementing them. Second category is the foundational controls. So these ones focus very heavily on additional technologies that will help to secure the enterprise. So email and web browser protections. So looking at how do we control our email and our web browsers? How do we ensure that we're not letting attackers get that initial foothold into the organization? This is how most attacks really get started, is through something that either gets picked up on the web or else comes in through email. Malware defense. This is pretty straightforward. I would say this is one of the controls that we see most of our clients doing very well in terms of ensuring that they have the right levels of protection in place and that those are functioning properly. Limitation and control of network ports. So this one, number 9, this focuses very heavily on your secure networking functions. So ensuring that you have proper network segmentation in place, ensuring that you're only allowing ports and protocols to IPs that are authorized and have a valid business function for why those are associated to them. Data recovery capabilities. This one's a little bit surprising, number 10. This one's focused actually very heavily on recovering from ransomware. So this essentially calls for things like ensuring that you have a robust and continuous backup process, ensuring that you have offline backups to respond when that sort of thing happens. Secure configuration of number 11, network devices. So this is similar to number 5, but this one's focused around network devices. So ensuring that the configurations we're applying make sense to what's going on with the organization. Ensuring that those functions are set so that the network layer has the right level of protection. Boundary defense. This is really looking at IPS functionality. One of the more advanced controls in here is, for instance, full packet capture on outbound data, as well as inbound data from the internet and so on. Data protection. So this again focuses on controlling data, how we're doing some of our DLP functions. Controlled access based on the need to know. This is looking instead at access control. So who has access to what? Is it appropriate to the business? Are we just by default giving everyone access to a lot of sensitive data because we haven't been able to figure out who actually needs access to it? So that's some of the stuff we tend to focus on there. Wireless access control. Again, we're looking at more networking. That's pretty straightforward. And then access monitoring control. So this kind of goes back as well to number 6. We're looking for anomalies around controls. One of the more advanced sub-controls within number 16 is actually looking for UEBA, so user and entity behavior anomaly detection, to try to find out what users might be doing that they shouldn't be doing, and then respond to those, or what they're doing that's out of the ordinary that might indicate a compromise in place. The last category of controls is the organizational controls, and these ones are focused entirely on or almost entirely on processes. These don't tend to focus heavily on tools. I'd say that's a very minor component of these, which is a bit of a deviation from our foundational sections, which are almost exclusively tools. So 17, implement a security awareness training program. This is very much focused on how do you improve your user base, how do you evaluate their skills and then enhance them. Application security, software security, very much focused on your SDLC. How do you identify vulnerabilities during the development process? How do you get those vulnerabilities addressed? Incident response and management, one tends to be fairly straightforward, as well as penetration testing and red team exercises. Again, these ones do have some components that tend to be fairly advanced, such as number 20, it advocates creating an entirely separate environment that's really just intended for penetration testing, so that you can conduct tests against that environment that you wouldn't normally conduct in your production environment, such as testing for DDoS resiliency or doing other potentially destructive tests against that environment. But again, those ones are fairly advanced, and that's part of the process. Part of the reason why we focus very heavily on the risk assessment process during evaluating the various risks identified. So with that, let me go ahead and I will turn it over for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great job. Yeah, we do have a few questions from the audience here. Number one, what controls create the most challenges for organizations?
Let me see here. So I guess I would say that the ones that are, well, it can vary quite a bit. For instance, we have some where we're running into a lot of challenges around vulnerability management, for instance. I would say initially, one of the things that we find is that a lot of organizations have missed a lot of these steps in the basic section. A lot of them focus very heavily on the foundational area, and they miss out on some of this basic stuff. So for instance, having an inventory of all the systems within the enterprise, having that inventory of software and so on. So that's that tends to be some of the biggest focuses that we've seen. But I would say the ones inside of basic really trip up a lot of folks, just because we oftentimes skip the basics and start focusing on the foundational components, because those tend to be the more visible and the more obviously associated back to information security. Matt, are there any other questions?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm here on mute. How can we compare ourselves to other organizations is the next question.
Yeah, so that's definitely a hard question. For us, it's relatively easy because we get to talk to a lot of different organizations. We get to find out exactly where everybody is at, and that makes it easy for us to do it. For other organizations that don't have the access to the wealth of clients that we do, I would probably focus pretty heavily on working with various peer groups, getting an understanding of for instance, what other organizations are doing. For instance, if you run across something like application whitelisting, it's pretty straightforward to talk to peers within your industry and find out, what are you guys doing for application whitelisting? Is it something that you're addressing at all, or is it something that you're not addressing? And that can make it a little bit easier to get an understanding of where others are at overall. It's pretty hard to get a full view of everything from that end of things, but that at least can get you started. And if again, for more of a jump start, we can come in and give the full spectrum of understanding.
Okay, great. Yeah, peer groups are an excellent resource. The next question here from the audience is, what's the risk quantification process?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide. There we go. So essentially what they're suggesting is calling out from score 1 to 3 different criteria here, and the criteria that they specifically call out really needs to be scalable for each organization. So for for instance, on a 1 to 3 basis, and again, these numbers can be changed to whatever scale is more appropriate for your organization. CIS calls a 1 no or minimal harm would result, a 2 is harm would not be tolerable, and 3 is harm may not be recoverable. So there's a pretty wide swath in their case between the overall impact scores that they're using. The likelihood they're using, again, on a scale of 1 to 3, a likelihood of 1 they see as not foreseeable, a 2 is expected to occur, and a 3 is regular occurrence. So again, there's a pretty wide swath in there. From our end, we end up using the Hydra risk model, which again allows us to quantify risk a little bit more deeply. We're looking at 5 different criteria instead of looking at simply 2 or 3 in this case. The other component to it as well is that really it's up to the organization to kind of figure out what the overall impact is going to be and what the various quantifications need to be. So definitely something to consider as you're starting to go through this, and that's really what they want you to establish at the very beginning, at the very onset, is what your risk classification process is.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Ben. Those were all of the questions from the audience. So at this time, I think I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us and for all of the great questions. If there are any additional questions, or if you'd like to learn more about implementing CIS controls at your organization, don't hesitate to reach out to Ben. As you can see, his contact information is here. We are also happy to provide a recording of the webinar if there's anyone on your team that you'd like to share with. And so with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and stay safe.